Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. My wife and I have been married since the middle of 2005. I know this because this story took place during our honeymoon, which was in July of that same year. Unlike most couples that want to go to Hawaii or some other fancy place for their honeymoon, we decided that we would do a road trip to Yellowstone and wanted to see some of the vast empty parts of Wyoming. There may not be much there, but it's still a gorgeous area to visit. Plus, since we live in the panhandle of Oklahoma, it was a pretty good drive up through Colorado and to the northwestern corner of the state. The highway that we took had us driving straight through Denver and then to the border and then into the Rawlins area of Wyoming. Now, if any of you had driven through Colorado and into Wyoming, you know that Colorado has the most beautiful of scenery. And while Wyoming is also absolutely gorgeous, there is damn near nothing anywhere. You end up on the highway, and you drive and drive and drive, and you just keep going until you hit the next established area. There is the occasional rest stop, the gas station, and then a few areas where you'll see houses. But for the most part, there's just nothing there, making it the epitome of middle of nowhere. A lot of the trip from Rawlins and northwest of there's practically nothing to see until you start hitting the open areas of the forest. The situation that I'm wanting to tell about actually happened outside of the National Forest area, in a part of Wyoming where there was nothing but Highway 287 to be exact. We were driving, making good time on our way out to Yellowstone as mentioned, when something caught my wife's eye. I was paying attention to the road, and she nudged me and asked if I saw something burning up ahead. I did, but I assumed that it was just a controlled brush fire and that they were burning off dead grass by the side of the highway. My wife then basically told me that that wasn't likely the case, as there were no firefighters stationed nearby, and they typically don't do controlled burns on small sections like that. She then mentioned that I should stop and we should put it out. Her thought was that someone may have thrown a cigarette out the window and the brush had slowly caught fire. It made sense to me honestly, and I have a small fire extinguisher in my car at all times, so I agreed with her. I slowed the car down and I pulled over to the side of the road and a little bit behind the fire. I then unloaded the fire extinguisher from its holster in the back. She then gets out and asks me if she should call the fire department to at least let them know it happened and that we put it out. I told her that that was a good idea. That way, they didn't drive by and think that we were the ones burning stuff. But as we approached, things got a little weird and pretty fast. The closer I got, the more I noticed about this seemingly innocuous fire. First thing I noticed about it was that it wasn't burning in a random spot. The fire was built. I could see the area where it was lit and had been cut out, and that there was no grass around the ring of rocks that the person had put together. Whoever put this small pit together knew what they were doing. And the second thing I noticed was that the fire wasn't just burning sticks. It looked like there was something else in the little fire pit. I pulled the ring and all that, and I swept the fire out. And once I was sure that things were no longer burning, I walked up to the pile of debris, and I was 100% right. Whoever started this little fire, they weren't just burning sticks, but what they were burning makes this a million times more confusing, and honestly, just as creepy. As I was sifting through the burned items, I noticed that a lot of what was in the fire was soft and fluffy, and I figured out that there were several stuffed animals that were in the burn pile. I remember there being a teddy bear, a small horse, and just several stuffed animals that would have made any child's collection. Under all the stuffed animals, there was a small pile of what appeared to be a little girl's clothing, and I mean all kinds of clothing. This fire was built by someone out there to burn a small collection of children's items, and honestly, that was probably the freakiest thing that I have ever encountered out on the road. We obviously called 911 and we let them know about what we found. My thought process on that was that it could be evidence in a case and that they likely needed to process what was in the pile just in case. On top of that, I didn't want them coming to find us if they found it later and investigated it. The highway patrol showed up and they took our statements and pictures and did all the basic runs of our information and then let us leave after when he was satisfied that we had nothing to do with it. Obviously, I had no idea what all of that was, and I don't want to know, like at all. I can say that I have never seen anything like that again in any fires along the road or anything. But yeah, so that happened, and it's something that kind of haunts my nightmares at this point. This happened to me a few years ago, and I've learned my lesson. Me and a group of friends from school decided to take a spring break trip since we were graduating and we wanted to do something wild for a change. We settled where else but Florida. Beaches, drinks, and whatever else it brings us. We set up our plans, wait a grueling week or so for it to come, and finally head out. We got there and the hotel was great. There was a bar in the hotel, but what would be the fun in that, right? So we headed out, grabbed some pizza, and scouted out the area for nearby bars and other interesting places. We found a bar which we decided to stop in, and the looks are deceiving. It was a lot smaller inside than it looked. There was a short bar on one side, a few old rickety booths, and a long table along the side with bar stools and those little touch-screen games. There were more older people in there, but we were tired and we just wanted to have a good time for our first night. There were a few women who looked about our age playing pool, so we thought that we would give it a shot. Me and two of my friends grabbed drinks and we headed over to the girls. They allowed us to stay and we played a few rounds with them. It was a lot of fun, but apparently we were too loud for them, so after giving us multiple warnings, we decided to leave. It was already late, so we split from there, and I unfortunately didn't get any of their phone numbers, but at least I had 3 more days to try. The next night was fun, but the third night was where things got weird. We found a VR game cafe and we hung out there for a while. We had lunch, then decided that we would get a couple packs of beer and a cooler and then head out to the beach. It was normal. We found a spot and one of my friends rented a surfboard and decided that he would try it out. This idiot has never surfed in his life, so it was more fun for us to watch him fall over every time. There was also a group of people playing beach volleyball, so after a few beers, I decided that I was okay with making a fool out of myself too. I joined for a while, and then we stopped to get something to eat and more drinks, since what we had wouldn't last. One of the girls offered to have us go back to her condo to continue the partying, and of course, we were not passing that up. When we got there were already a few people. That was a blast from what I remember, I know we had more shots, games, lots of stupid dares, but that's about all I remember from that night. The next morning, I woke up under a tree in a parking lot of a thrift store. The only thing I was wearing was my swim trunks, and I had a set of keys in my pockets that were not mine. My scalp also seemed really irritated, and that's when I realized that my hair had been colored blue. It was coming off on my hand, so I figured that it was the spray stuff, but I still don't remember any of that happening. I tried to look around and place myself, but I didn't recognize any of the buildings or street names. It doesn't help that I'm not from Florida either. So yes, I was a little concerned. The thrift store wasn't open, it seemed, so I walked across the street to a gas station to see if they could help me or at least tell me where the hell I was. The lady at the register really looked annoyed, like she must be used to this kind of thing, honestly, but she was nicer than I expected. She actually told me the hotel I was at was about 6 or 7 miles from where we were, so thankfully I was in the same state and not too far. I didn't have any money or my cell phone on me, so I couldn't call a friend, nor could I pay for anything, so I was about to be screwed. The cashier was hesitant about letting me use the store's phone, but she finally let me. I tried calling my friend, but they didn't answer, so I had no choice but to start walking. It gave me some time to try and remember what happened, but I legit don't remember anything after the shots and my friend trying to jump over the concrete wall in the back. My head was starting to hurt and I was getting tired and thirsty, so I tried my luck at hitchhiking. I can't say I blame anyone for not stopping for me, some guy in trunks and a sloppy blue dyed hair, but someone finally did. It was an older lady in some beat-up pickup. I told her the best that I could where I was heading. She kinda reminded me of my grandma, and it was hard to explain that I got blackout drunk and I didn't know where I was. She was nervous, of course, but ultimately told me to ride in the back of the bed and she would take me to the hotel. I got there, and thankfully the front desk lady remembered me. Somehow, she got me back into my room since I didn't have my key or ID. None of my friends were there. I was just hoping that they did not end up in the same position as myself. I took a shower, I got dressed, and I'm not gonna lie, I just crashed. I was exhausted, and my head was still killing me. I did, however, wake up to my friends throwing a bottle of water at me. Apparently, they made it as far as the lobby, passed out on the couches, and were told to either leave or go to their rooms if they were staying there. They then got up and went looking for me while I made my way back here. Unfortunately, the shower didn't get all the blue dye out, and they said that they don't remember me ever doing that, nor did they have any clue whose keys I had. None of us drove or rented a car, and our house keys were in our suitcases. We kinda kicked back the last night to recover and try to remember what the hell happened, but we still can't. To make it even weirder, as we were checking out, the guy at the front desk said that there was a note left for me, which, shockingly, was my ID wrapped in a Burger King receipt that was 2 months old with a lipstick print on it. He was able to match the name on the ID to me since the room was in my name. So, overall, I lost a night that I can't remember, lost my wallet, and gained a set of keys that I still have because it's now a reminder that I will never do something so dumb again.
About 2 years ago, I lived in an old house outside of city limits in western Alabama. Wild hogs are considered a nuisance in this part of the country, and thus a year-round game. The land wasn't mine, but it was legal hunting ground, so my landlord gave me and my friends explicit permission to take care of any hogs we came across. So a lot of the time, especially during the winter when this encounter took place, I was posted up on my back porch with a cigar and a gun, either by myself or with company. This land wasn't very clear. In fact, we only had about 20 feet from the porch to the tree line. Then it would go down a hill and the brush would get thicker. So our hunting was just being quiet and looking for the beady eyes of hogs in the foliage when we heard rustling. So, all that being said, one night during my porch sitting, I heard some rustling. I started scanning the woods for this hog and eventually did come across a set of white, beady eyes. They weren't a hog's though, because these were eye level with me. As my eyes continued to adjust, the rest of the creature started coming into view. It was tall, thin, and had long, spindly arms and legs. Its entire body was completely black. I couldn't make out any other facial features besides the eyes. But what I could make out was that this thing was actually a good ways down the hill. So the fact that it was still eye level with me meant that it was likely around 10 feet tall. It started up the hill, moving towards me. I had this feeling in my gut that my .45 caliber bullets probably weren't going to do much here. So I slowly collected my things and headed back into the house. It didn't make any sound as it moved, other than the slight crunch of leaves. As it climbed the hill, it somewhat stopped at the tree line. It then turned and walked along the edge of it. It bobbed and lurched a bit as it walked, kind of how some large birds bob their heads as they move. That was the most terrified I had been in a long while. But this wasn't the only encounter. My hunting buddies and I all saw it several times, walking through the trees a good bit away from the house, sometimes turning to look at us. My roommate, that moved in later that same year, once walked outside and saw it right up against the porch, looking right down at her. It never tried to attack anyone, or even acted aggressively, so we eventually stopped being as scared, though still very cautious, and started calling him Big Boy. I've told a couple other friends about this. One of them said the description and behavior matched something called a California Dark Watcher. I did my research, and as much as this creature matches up, this was on the opposite end of the continent. I'm still not 100% sure what it was that I saw, but I'm 100% sure I saw it. Multiple people did. Update. Just spoke to my old roommate that saw it close up. She said that it was more eerie than downright scary. It looked at her like it was curious, tilting its head to the side like a dog when you're holding something at once. My hunting buddies and I all saw it from 30 to 50 feet away, but she ended up being closer than all of us. She confirmed no features other than eyes, but it had sunken in spaces on the face where there would be features. I understand her not taking a picture. I wouldn't take a picture of a bear if it was 10 feet from me, let alone this thing.
I grew up in a very busy family. Both of my parents worked a lot and were hardly home, meaning time together was few and far in between. We spent a lot of time with babysitters and relatives, and when we did on the rare occasion have a family vacation, it wasn't all that special. It was typically a hotel with a pool that me and my siblings would play in, and maybe one of my parents while the other one was working in the room. I bring this up because my now wife, girlfriend at that time, had a completely different family. They always had time together, including weekly dinners, get-togethers, and also vacations. They started inviting me on vacation with them, and it was always a blast. Resorts, staying at their condo in South Carolina, all kinds of memories. One thing that my wife loved to do was go camping with her father. She said they usually went to the same campground, but always went as far back as they could and then deeper into the woods, so that way there were less people around to bother them. They also liked doing this so they could go fishing without anyone else disturbing the waters. I had never camped in my life, and the closest thing to fishing that I had done was those little toy fishing games you see at the state fair. So when they asked me to join them, I didn't hesitate. My wife and I went and got supplies for myself, some new stuff for her, and a fancy blue tent for ourselves. We made our way to the campground right outside a little city in Wisconsin, and then we met her dad in the parking lot. We then followed him towards the back of the grounds, parked, and then started grabbing our gear to walk through the trees and bushes. When we got through it though, I knew it had to be the perfect spot to camp. I could just barely make out our vehicles, but you could hardly even hear the other cars driving by. Because of the walk to get there, you also had plenty of time to hear someone approaching. So, we set up our tents, got our fire pit ready, and then started getting our fishing gear in order. I embarrassingly needed help with mine, but thankfully my wife, Jen, helped me. Well, Mike teased me, but all in all, it was fun though. Once we finished, we walked a little further down by the water and started fishing. It went pretty well. I had some troubles, but nothing that stopped me or held me back from doing it more. We started our fire, made a small dinner, and then just relaxed. It was a great first night camping in my opinion. It wasn't until we went to bed that the problems started occurring. I had a lot of trouble falling asleep. I couldn't get comfortable. I got too hot, and every little sound I heard made me sit up and look around. I know it made no sense and I was being unreasonable, but I suppose, with it being my first time, I wasn't used to not sleeping on a mattress behind a locked door. All the while, I was impressed as to how deep in sleep Jen and my snoring father-in-law was. Thankfully, I finally fell asleep, but I was awoken by another sound sometime later. I rolled over to hold my wife when I noticed that she wasn't in the tent. Thinking maybe she was going to relieve herself, I just waited for her to return. I remember checking my watch, and the time was around 2 a.m. I lay there, and I managed to fall asleep and again woke up to noises. However, my wife still hadn't returned. I looked at my watch and it was now a little past 4. As I started to put my watch back down and unzip my sleeping bag, the tent started to be opened and in came my wife. She was tired and not all coherent. I asked her if she was okay, and her only response was, tired. And she slipped back into her sleeping bag and was right back out. I didn't give it much attention after that, and I just worked on falling back asleep. The next morning, I was groggy, but I was ready to get the day started and enjoy this time we had. We would be out here for 2 more nights, so I wanted to do all that I could while we were there. We made a quick breakfast, went to a nearby hiking trail for several hours, and then we went swimming. From there, we took showers in the rooms that they had set up nearby, and then headed back to our spot to fish some more. I did better this time around, and with all we did, I was hopeful that I would crash that night. And I did. I was out pretty quickly, but I woke up when I had to use the restroom. As I rolled over, I noticed Jen wasn't in the tent again. I checked my watch, and it was around 2 a.m. again. I thought it was just a coincidence, but I sat up, waiting for her to get back so I could go out there. When she didn't return for several minutes, and with it getting harder for me to hold it, I finally just got up and went out. I grabbed a flashlight, walked straight from the entrance to our tent and then through the trees a little ways over and took care of my business. As I was walking back, I was trying to look to see if I could find Jen. I saw our tent, our fire to the right, and then Mike's tent on the other side, facing the opposite way of ours. But there was no Jen. I started walking around the pit to see if she was over by her dad's tent, when I noticed a light coming from the ground facing away from the tent. I started approaching the light, which already had me panicking as it was towards the dense trees, so it made it look like there were a lot of people standing there. After reasoning with myself that they were just trees, and that's when I noticed that they weren't all trees. Jen was standing there, tall, not moving, looking slightly up towards a tree. I picked up her flashlight and I asked if she was okay. No response. I walked in front of her and I noticed that her eyes were wide open, staring into this tree. I looked up into the tree to see if I could see anything, but there was nothing there. I then looked back at her, put my hand on her shoulder and said her name. She didn't respond. It was weird, and I didn't know what to do, so I just told her that I was heading back to the tent, and then I walked away, looking back at her every few steps. She never moved, never said anything, and her stare didn't break. I went back to the tent and I fell asleep. I didn't know how long it had been at first, but I woke up to her coming back in. I checked the time and again, it was 4 a.m. I asked her again if she was okay, since she had been out there for a few hours. And again, the only response that I got was tired, and then she fell asleep. I just sat there staring at her for a few seconds before I finally fell asleep. The next morning, I asked her how she slept. She said she actually felt exhausted, like she didn't hardly sleep, and then joked how mine and her dad's snoring kept her up. So, I mentioned her being up for about 2 hours, staring at a tree. She thought I was joking at first, but then I explained more how she did this that night before, and again, this last night, and how I found her. She did not recall any of this. She said she never left to go to the bathroom. She wasn't looking at a tree or anything, but I was adamant that she did. She just shrugged it off, saying maybe she sleptwalked. I agreed, since she didn't remember this, but she doesn't sleepwalk too. I've never seen her do so in our apartment. But not wanting to dwell on it, we enjoyed our last day there, doing stuff around the campsite, and then visiting a few places that Mike wanted to go to. Night came, and I readied myself for bed. This time, though, I would try to stay up to catch Jen leaving the tent. We went to bed. I laid in bed for a bit, and after she fell asleep, I pulled out my book that I had brought to read. It did help for a bit, but I couldn't hold my eyes open much longer, and I just started drifting off. However, I woke up to hear the tent being zipped up. I looked at the clock and it was 1:58 a.m. I got out. I watched her as she walked through those trees again, no shoes on, and holding just the flashlight. When she got to that same tree, she dropped the flashlight and just stared up at it. So I again approached her, saw the blank look at her face staring up at this tree, and I walked all around this tree to see if I could see anything at all. There was nothing there. I shined the flashlight in her face, and she didn't even flinch or blink. And finally, I grabbed her by both shoulders, gently shook her, calling her name, and like some creepy-ass movie, she slowly looked down at me and said, "It's waiting," and slowly looked back up at this tree. I let go of her shoulders. I looked back up at the tree one more time and I just saw the branches move. I could not see a damn thing, but that was enough to make me run back to the tent. I know, call me whatever you want for leaving my wife there, but I felt that something obviously preferred her presence over mine. I definitely couldn't sleep after that, so I just stayed awake. I was waiting to see her return, and like clockwork, she came back at 4:17 a.m. and went right to sleep. It apparently showed the next morning that I didn't sleep well, and as we were packing up, I walked around that tree one more time to see if there was anything there, and there was nothing. The only thing slightly off seemed to be the gap between some of the branches, kind of like when something big goes through a bush and leaves a gap. Something had definitely been in that tree, but I saw nothing. I just told them that I had trouble sleeping and didn't bring it up till after we got home. We didn't have smartphones at that time, so I couldn't really take pictures or a video, but she believed me for some reason. She still didn't remember any of this, but I sure hell did. What's even weirder is that we have gone camping since at other places with no incident. I was reminded of this because Mike is retiring, and he was planning a trip out to the same campsite. With a kid of our own now, we're thinking about going with him. But if she does this again, or my kid does, I'm sleeping in my car. "5 years ago, I was transferred from Saitama to Atami due to a change in the company that I worked at. Well, due to the change in management, the workload was massive and we were severely understaffed. So, after the first week of work in my new city, one of my coworkers decided that we should all go out and get drinks to celebrate surviving our first week. We had a good time drinking and complaining about the new changes to the company. And at around 1 a.m., we had all decided to go our separate ways. Most ended up going to the train station, but the pub we were at was near to my apartment complex, so I decided to walk home on my own instead. I bid everyone farewell before walking in the opposite direction towards my home. However, given that I was new to the area, I think I made a wrong turn because I ended up under the F tunnel instead of above it where I should have been going. Seeing no stairs on this side, I decided to check the other side to see if there were any, so that I could get back on track. But as I walked through the tunnel, I noticed one of the lights flickering. I paid it no mind, just assuming that the bulb had gone bad, and I continued walking. But just as I walked under it, each and every light in the tunnel began to flicker violently before going out. Well, almost all the lights. I did have a faint light coming from behind me. Turning around, I saw that only a single light was on, illuminating the tunnel. And what was underneath it was some clothing in a pile. After a second, my eyes began to adjust to the darkness, seeing that it wasn't just clothing, but it was a woman, or at least half of her. The bottom half of this woman was completely missing, and only a pool of blood where her bottom half should be. I screamed, and as I did, it seemed as though I alerted the corpse to my presence. The woman, she looked up at me, eyes hollow. "Help me," she cried, but I was in shock. Fearing for my life, I began to back away. Seeing this, the woman began clawing forward. Her fingertips were unnaturally long, and she dragged her torso towards me while yelling angrily, "Help me! Help me!" I turned around and I ran, hearing her fingernails clamoring against the pavement as the corpse gave chase. I could hear the tapping of her nails growing closer and closer, but I could see the end of the tunnel in sight. and just as I was about to reach it, something grabbed my foot. Looking back, the woman had grabbed my foot and was trying to drag me back into the darkness of the tunnel while continuing to sob, "Help me." Without a second thought, I kicked off my shoe, freeing me from her grasp, and scrambled into the light before getting up and running. As I finally looked back, I saw the F tunnel fully lit and my shoe just at the end of the tunnel. I did not try to get my shoe back. I backed away from the tunnel, keeping my eye on it, taking a very long way back home, as I didn't have the courage to walk over top it as I originally intended. And once I got home, I didn't sleep until late the next day. I never tried to get my shoe back, mainly because I never went that way ever again. I don't know what would have happened to me if I stayed there, and I don't intend to tempt fate and find out.
My house has been in my family for decades. A side house from the main farm home that's on the main part of the popcorn farm I live on in southern Michigan. I've always felt watched in my house, even when no one else is at home. And I guess, with this experience, I got a first-hand look at why I felt that way. Back in the winter of my sophomore year of high school in 2018, I had just gotten home from a basketball practice that ran late. I did my normal routine of jumping in the shower and going straight to bed, just because I had school in the morning, even though I was as wide awake as could be. My older brother was at work, and my parents were shopping for Christmas shopping, about 15 to 20 minutes away. I got an overwhelming feeling of dread after I got out of the shower, like something was on the other side of the bathroom door, waiting for me. And when I slung the door open with all my courage, nothing was there. But I only got more anxious, so I ran to my bedroom, just an immediate turn left. I jumped in bed and chalked it up to being my normal anxiety of being home alone, even though I know it felt like more than just that. I got into some boxes and laid back in bed and watched some YouTube on my phone. Something from my favorite storytime animator to lighten my mood and relax me until my parents or brother got home, whichever came first. Relieved, I heard someone walking into the bathroom quickly, like my dad seems to always do when they're gone for a minute. Just happy someone was home, I leaned back in relief. Just to my right was a small bedside table, about a third of the height of my laying down flat on my bed to the top of my door, so I could still see anything above it easily, and about 3 feet wide, so that's about all that was between me and the door. As soon as a knock came, I felt the feeling of dread, stronger than I've ever felt before, immediately knowing something bad was going to happen. The door creaked open, enough for what I thought was my mum to fit half of her small 5'5" figure through. I asked, "Mum?" in a confident tone. This figure just stared down at me, laying in my bed. Realizing this just wasn't a silhouette of my mum, it was dark, like I could visibly see it with only the moonlight illuminating my room. I proceeded to ask, "Lane?" My older brother, who by no means has a figure of a small woman, he's 6'2". It's just what came out of my mouth, hoping it was him because who else could it be? The figure, being as dark as it was, shook its head no, slowly, and slowly slipped out of the door and shut the door behind it. After maybe 10 seconds of silence, I sat up, confused and scared. I opened my door, thinking it was my parents messing with me, but their bedroom is straight across from mine, and their room light was off, as was the hallway and the rest of the house, like no one was ever there. I walked out into the kitchen, and there they were, walking in, with arms full of grocery bags, and I asked them if they had come into my room. They said they had just walked in from shopping, and to help them with all they had left. I don't talk about this experience much, only with one other friend about 3 years after this experience, I felt as if my regular anxiety somehow willed this thing to me, like it wanted to mess with me.
So I, a 22-year-old male, decided to stay in a Motel 6 for one night in the southern New Hampshire area. I had back-to-back hospital shifts, so it wasn't worth it to drive 45 minutes back home just to do it again 6 hours later. I checked in around 11:15 p.m. and I went to my room. Of course, the door refused to open and the key ended up snapping in half, probably because it was 10 degrees outside. So I had to go back to the office to change rooms and get a new card. My new room actually did open. It was pretty clean overall, and I didn't see any major issues with it. I try to get some sleep, but I wake up at about 4 a.m. to people arguing somewhere in the hotel. I genuinely didn't think that it was possible to be so unbelievably loud between two people. And this argument went on for what seemed like forever until they finally shut the fuck up. However, about 15 minutes later, I hear someone trying to force their way into my room. I had both locked and latched the door. Yet, the door somehow was cracked open and the latch was definitely about to give out. It would have opened fully if I didn't say, "Get the fuck out!" And between the cracks, I just saw a dark figure in maybe a hoodie or jacket. Now, the instant that I said that, the door closed and the person seemingly left. Now, I would have opened the door and confronted them, but I did not have my gun on with me at that time. I genuinely have no idea what could have happened if I was fully asleep and I didn't hear them open the door. It was my first and last time ever staying at a Motel 6. And for the love of God, no matter how much money you're saving by staying at a Motel 6, please, 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 just stay at a regular hotel. I promise you, it's worth it. I'm not sure if my story belongs here, but I've always been creeped out by it. I, a female, was 25 at that time. This was 2018, and I lived with my boyfriend in our hometown. It's a small city that's relatively poor, and it also has some drug problems, as there's not much to do. My boyfriend, now husband, was at his friend's house. It was a Saturday night, and he said that he would be home around 9. He was about 2 towns over, a 20-minute drive. At that time, we lived in a duplex split upstairs and downstairs. It used to be a big house converted into a duplex. My cousin actually rented the downstairs apartment, and she was kind of loud, so I knew when she was and wasn't home. And she wasn't home this night. The way our street was situated, the backs of the houses on my street and the parallel street all faced a narrow alley, and the driveways were mostly only accessible this way. The downstairs unit had a front porch with a door and a side door, and our upstairs unit had a back door, and it was at the top of an outside set of wooden stairs. So anyway, I'm home watching TV alone, and I hear someone coming up the stairs and then knock on the door. It's 8:30 at this point. It wouldn't be that unusual for my boyfriend to be home early. Maybe they got bored playing video games, or maybe he just felt like leaving. I usually would unlock the door for him when he came home instead of him using his keys, because it was dark and it could be a hassle. So I got up and I opened the door to someone who was not my boyfriend. It was a pretty thin man wearing 2 big jeans and a hoodie. He had about 4 teeth, and he was teetering back and forth. I was so shocked considering that I was positive that it was my boyfriend coming home. The guy at the door then asked me, "Can I use your phone?" Behind him, down the stairs and in the alley, I see a big SUV, Ford Explorer type of vehicle, just idling there, with someone in the driver's seat. I panic, and I just say, hold on." And I then shut and lock the door. I think I was more shocked that it was a stranger at my door and not my boyfriend than anything else. I hide so he can't see me through the front doors and windows, and I'm just frozen. Something was telling me that this was not okay. And after a few minutes, I hear him start walking down the stairs. I go over to the door and see the car drive away down the alley. I call my boyfriend and I tell him, and he says that he'll leave. But like I said, it was a 20-minute drive and he was about to leave anyway. After he got home, I calmed down and honestly felt silly. Why not just lend him my phone, right? Was it really that weird? But then, I thought about it more over the next few days. It was 2018. This guy and whoever was driving, between the two of them, neither one had a phone? And it wasn't like they were having car trouble. What would they want a stranger's phone for? They also went down an alley and to the back side of a house, up some stairs, to ask for a phone. They didn't go to my cousin's front door downstairs, or I would have heard someone on the porch. They did not go to any other house, because I saw them leave the street entirely. Also, why go to a house to ask for a phone when there was no car in the driveway? And of course, our battery-powered security camera was dead at that time. I genuinely am not sure what they wanted. If anyone has any idea or thinks I'm just overthinking it, please let me know. But creepy guy at my door, let's not meet again. Hello everyone. I need some advice on what to do in this rather strange situation. Last night, after a party, a guy who is a friend of a friend offered to drop me home. I was hesitant and I wanted to book an Uber, but he insisted on driving me. The problem was, I was feeling quite drunk and out of sorts. When we got to the parking lot, he sat in the car with me, turned off the lights, and he said that he would wait for a few minutes since he was feeling a little high too. I got scared and I said that I would go out and wait, but he convinced me not to and even discouraged me from booking an Uber. Things took a weird turn when he started driving in the wrong direction, assuming that I was too intoxicated to notice. But I wasn't, and I asked him to take the correct turns. He kept taking detours and turning off the GPS, but I managed to use my phone to navigate and then get us back on track. During the ride, he started praising me excessively, talking about how other girls in his life weren't good, but that I was different. He seemed to be pushing me into something more, even though I have a long-distance boyfriend. It really made me feel uncomfortable, and I insisted that he take me straight home. After reaching home, I realized that he left his ID card in my bag. Now, I want to return it to him, but given the weird behavior during the ride, I'm not sure how to do it safely. I don't want to meet him alone again, and the common friend has moved to another state. Has anyone been in a similar situation, or has any advice on how I can safely return his ID card without putting myself in an uncomfortable or risky position? Update. About the ID, I did drop it off at a friend's place and ask him to take it from there. He seemed to have realized, but he wants not to talk about it. He asked me to hang out again, and I mentioned that he got a little too drunk that night. I told him the location of his ID, and I then blocked his number. However, I don't want to be a part of any drama, so I was not super rude as I initially thought that I will be. I politely told him that this made me feel uncomfortable and that I don't want to be friends anymore, and then I blocked him. Hi, I thought that I would share my experience in case anyone's been through something similar or maybe has an idea of what kind of scenario I was dealing with. I was driving home from the gym at night and I pulled up to a red light near a local courthouse. I noticed the driver of a white Jeep one lane over staring at me. He was an older guy, I guess late 40s to 50s with long sideburns. I'm a 31-year-old male though, so without additional context, I have no idea if this matters. I turned and looked at him and he started pointing towards me or towards my left. At first, I thought he wanted to cut in front of me when the light turned green again, which is strange because there was no one coming behind us, so he could have just waited for me to go, but I guess someone else might pull up. I pointed to my left to confirm that that's what he wanted, and I even opened my window a tiny bit because he just kept pointing, so I wanted to ask him what was up. Well, he didn't open his window. The light turned green and he changed lanes to drive behind me. It feels likely that he was trying to tell me to pull over earlier. I kept driving and changed lanes because he was tailgating me and he followed me immediately. Eventually, he switched lanes, but he was driving so erratically and he kept putting his left turn signal on but not turning left at several lights, for example. He also slowed down to maintain the same pace as me a few times. Eventually, I turned before my actual home route just to throw him off. He kept going, but when I looped around to actually head home, I saw him at the light waiting to turn left on the road towards my house. I didn't stop. I had to keep driving. I'm not sure what his intentions were, but that was strange and unnerving, to say the least. Recently, there was an Amber Alert, and my daughter was asking me what that beeping sound was all about. For those who don't know, an Amber Alert goes out when a child is reported missing. If you receive notifications, you know what I'm talking about. The alert will sometimes give information like the victim's appearance, as well as the perpetrator, the location of the abduction, the make and the model of the vehicle. My phone started beeping one evening while I was helping my daughter clean her room. It was an Amber Alert. She asked about it, and I gave her a small rundown, and that was that. However, it triggered a childhood memory that I have, where I believe with all of my heart that I was almost kidnapped when I was a kid. To be clear, this isn't a memory that was laying dormant in my subconscious, and this random Amber Alert and talk with my kid caused it to resurface in my mind. This incident is something that I've pondered and thought about off and on for years now. I'm 41 years old and male, by the way. It's just been a while since I've considered the factors and the details of that experience, and this recent Amber Alert and talk with my daughter really caused me to pause and reflect on that incident. And here I am. As a parent, you worry about these things, and you do all you can to protect your children, especially when you personally experience something truly scary like this. This occurrence happened when I was just a young kid. My guess is around 7 or 8. I can't be sure, but I think that's a safe estimate based on the fact that much of those early childhood memories aren't there anymore. I do remember my kindergarten experience, which I would have been 5 to 6, and also later grades. So this incident must have happened sometime after or around the ages of 7 to 8. My parents took me to a neighboring city to do some shopping. We lived in a small rural town with not much to offer, so from time to time, we would go to this neighboring city about 45 minutes from where we were located. It just had one more to offer. They would take me up there for school clothes shopping, out to eat because the restaurants were better there, and because my mom was a crafter. She loved to make crafts. It was her thing. There were different craft stores and also a fabric store that she liked going to up there. In this specific trip, we went to a fabric store up there, Jo-Ann Fabrics to be exact. This was a pretty big store, and as a little kid, I guess most every place seems big, but no kidding, this was a sizable store. My dad sat out in the car while I went in with my mom. He did that a lot, sit in the car when there was a store that he just didn't want to go in, so I really can't blame him there. I can't recall exactly what all my mom was looking for or trying to get in that store that day, but I do remember what section we were in. It was an area with a bunch of racks with various fabrics hanging. Imagine a clothing store with circular racks with clothes hanging around them, and that's pretty much what it's like at this fabric store. Racks of hanging fabrics. I remember this area being slightly toward the beginning or entrance of the store. As my mom was looking through these racks, I began to wander, though not that far, just enough to kind of look around myself. I was probably bored and started wandering around is my guess. But I could still see my mom just up and over a few racks away, so it wasn't like I was on the other side of the store or anything like that. But then, a random man approached me, and honestly, I can't even remember at what direction he came from. It's just like I was there by myself 1 minute, and the next, I looked up and I saw this guy. It was like he came in fast and out of nowhere. I quickly looked over to where my mom was. She had moved a few racks up and away, but I could still see her. There was a fair bit of distance between my mom and me at this point. So here I am, standing behind some rack of fabric, with this older guy opposite me in the other side of this rack. But then he speaks to me. He said, "Hey little boy, how you doing there?" I remained silent because this took me completely off guard. He asked again, "Where's your folks at? Are you alone here?" I stood still and quiet. Come here, I got something to show you." At this point, he started advancing towards me, coming around the rack to where I was. I quickly started the other way, but he stopped and started coming around the other way as if to meet me in the middle. I was scared at this moment and became instantly aware that this man seemed dangerous, like he was trying to get a hold of me. "Come here," he barked. I jerked as fast to the left, but he did the same. He had this wild look in his eyes now. Whichever direction I went, he followed. But remember, there's a rack between us. And God, am I so thankful for that rack. After some back and forth movements from me and this man, I finally lock in on my mom and yell, "Mom, help!" You would have thought I screamed bloody murder. It was so loud, but it got my mom's attention. "What's wrong?" she asked. This startled the man, and he looked over his shoulder in the direction of my gaze and confirmed that, yep, that must be his mother. His demeanor completely changes, and it's as if everything is just fun and games, and that he was just messing around, and he said as much to my mom. "Oh, I was just messing around with him. No harm, ma'am." My mom came to me where I was, and as we reconnected, the guy just tips his hat at my mom and makes his way out of the store. I explained to my mother what just happened and that this guy was trying to get me. I was so upset and shook up. She told me that I did the right thing by yelling and getting her attention. It was terrifying for sure, and I'm thankful that something crazy didn't happen. Could I have been imagining things like maybe this guy was just really messing around? I very much think there were nefarious intentions there. Why would a random older guy be perusing a fabric store? If he was there for something like crafts or fabrics, why promptly leave when confronted? I truly believe that he was up to no good. Anyway, that's my story, and I appreciate anyone taking the time to read this. And here's the riddle for this video. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate each and every one of you. But I would also like to thank my amazing patrons, my top tippers, and my dearest channel members. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it with all of my heart. If you want to support the channel further, you could also choose to become a patron, a tipper, or a channel member. But remember, it's appreciated, but never a requirement. I would also like to announce that we have merch now. The link is in the description of the video, along with all my other social media links, like my Discord server, Twitter, Instagram, and others. You can connect with me and send your stories there. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and comments are highly appreciated. And remember, your fear feeds me.